Let us begin our journey tonight by traveling back in time, not to an age of great kings or of mighty empires, but to a much older and more fundamental struggle, a time when humanity first dared to reshape the very world around them and, in doing so, created the very first civilization on Earth. Our story begins in a vast and sun-scorched land, a fertile crescent nestled between two great and powerful rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates. This land, which the ancient Greeks would later call Mesopotamia, the land between the rivers, was a place of profound and beautiful contradictions. It was a place where life-giving waters flowed through an otherwise harsh and unforgiving desert, a place where immense agricultural abundance existed alongside the constant and terrifying threat of catastrophic and unpredictable floods. It was in this great crucible of challenge and of opportunity that the very first seeds of civilization were planted, and it was here that humanity would achieve its first great victory over the chaotic forces of nature. Can you picture it? The landscape is flat and endless, stretching to a shimmering, hazy horizon under a sky of brilliant and often merciless blue. For much of the year, the sun beats down with a relentless intensity, baking the earth into a hard, cracked shell. And yet, this arid land is blessed by the presence of its two great rivers. The Tigris and the Euphrates, born in the distant mountains to the north, would, each spring, swell with the meltwater from the winter snows. And they would rush down onto the plains in a great and powerful, and often violent, flood. This annual inundation was both a gift and a curse. It brought with it a thick, rich layer of incredibly fertile silt, a dark and life-giving mud that would replenish the soil and allow for the cultivation of vast and bountiful crops. But it was also an unpredictable and destructive force, a great, swirling torrent of water that could, without warning, wash away entire villages and destroy the very fields that were meant to sustain them. It was in this challenging and dynamic environment that the very first pioneers, the people of the ancient Ubaid culture, began their great work around the 7th millennium BCE. These early settlers, living in small and simple villages of mud brick huts, understood that to survive, and to thrive, in this land, they had to do something that no human society had ever truly done before: they had to tame the great rivers. They had to learn to control the water. And so, with simple tools, with incredible patience, and with a growing and sophisticated understanding of their environment, they began to dig. They created the world's very first irrigation canals, small and simple at first, but growing more complex with each passing generation. These canals, these artificial, man-made rivers, would carefully and deliberately channel the life-giving waters of the Tigris and the Euphrates away from the main riverbeds and out into the dry and barren lands, transforming the desert into a vast and beautiful garden. They also built great earthen dikes and levees to protect their new fields and their new villages from the destructive power of the annual floods. This mastery of irrigation was the great and fundamental turning point. It was the revolutionary innovation that made everything else possible. By transforming the unpredictable and often violent blessing of the rivers into a stable and reliable resource, the early peoples of Mesopotamia were able to create an agricultural surplus on a scale that had never before been seen in human history. This new and abundant food supply, in turn, supported a larger and more settled population, and it freed up a portion of that population to pursue other, more specialized tasks. And so, the first true division of labor began to emerge, with some individuals becoming skilled artisans, others becoming priests who would mediate between the people and the gods, and still others becoming the first administrators, the first leaders who would organize the great, communal work of maintaining the precious and life-giving canals. The simple and egalitarian life of the small farming village was beginning to give way to something new, something larger, and something far more complex. The great miracle between the two rivers was not just the taming of the water, it was the birth of civilization itself. In the vast and flat expanse of the southern Mesopotamian plain, where the sky seemed to stretch on forever, the ancient Sumerians looked upon their world and saw it as a place that was alive with divine and powerful forces. And to communicate with these great gods, to honor them and to seek their favor, they began to build. And the first and most sacred of all their cities, a place that was believed to have been founded by the gods themselves, was the ancient city of Eridu. The story of Eridu, and of its magnificent temple, is the story of humanity's first great attempt to build a bridge between the world of mortals and the realm of the divine. The patron god of Eridu was the great and wise god, Enki, the master of the freshwater deep, the god of wisdom, of magic, and of creation. The Sumerians believed that it was Enki who had given them the knowledge they needed to build their canals, to cultivate their fields, and to create their civilization. And so, it was to him that they dedicated their first and most sacred temple. The temple at Eridu was not just a single building, it was a great and sprawling complex that grew and evolved over thousands of years. Can you picture it? Archaeologists have uncovered the remains of 17 successive temples, each one built directly on top of the ruins of the one before it, a beautiful and powerful testament to over 2,000 years of continuous and unbroken worship. The very first shrine was a simple and humble thing, a small, single-room structure of mud brick that was built around the year 5000 BCE. But as the city of Eridu grew in wealth and in power, so too did its temple. With each new rebuilding, the temple became larger, more complex, and more magnificent. The priests and the architects began to build the temple on a raised platform, a great, artificial mound of earth that was designed to lift the sacred structure up from the surrounding plain and to bring it closer to the heavens. This was the birth of the ziggurat, the great, stepped temple tower that would become the most iconic and most enduring feature of all Mesopotamian architecture. What was the true purpose of this great, man-made mountain? For the Sumerians, the ziggurat was more than just a platform for a temple, it was a sacred and liminal space, a place that was seen as a true and physical connection between the world of the gods and the world of humanity. It was a cosmic axis, a great and powerful symbol of the world mountain, the place where the heavens and the earth met. The great and monumental staircase that ascended the face of the ziggurat was a literal and a symbolic stairway to heaven, a path that the priests could walk to communicate with the gods, and that the gods themselves could use to descend to the earth and to be present among their people. And at the very top of the ziggurat stood the temple itself, the true and sacred household of the god. Imagine the scene inside this holy of holies. The air is thick with the sweet and heavy scent of burning incense. The walls are adorned with beautiful and intricate mosaics of colored clay cones, their geometric patterns gleaming in the dim, sacred light. In the center of the main hall stands a great and beautifully carved statue of the god Enki, his form not just a representation, but the physical and living embodiment of the god himself on earth. And before the statue is an offering table, where the priests perform the daily rituals, presenting the god with food, with drink, and with prayers, a constant and beautiful cycle of worship that was designed to maintain the delicate and crucial balance between the human and the divine worlds. The temple at Eridu was more than just a religious center, it was also the economic and the administrative heart of the entire city. The vast temple complex included great storehouses, where the city's surplus grain was kept as an offering to the god, and then redistributed to the people in times of need. It included workshops, where skilled artisans created beautiful and intricate objects for use in the temple rituals. And it included the quiet and ordered chambers of the scribe, where the temple administrators meticulously recorded the flow of goods and of labor on their small, clay tablets. The temple was a great and powerful redistributive center, a place that not only connected the people to their god but also bound them together into a single, cohesive, and highly organized community. The great and holy mountain of Eridu, with its magnificent, multi-layered temple, stood as a powerful and enduring symbol of the Sumerian achievement. It was a testament to their deep and profound faith, to their incredible organizational capacity, and to their brilliant and enduring vision of a world where the gods and humanity could live in a state of beautiful and harmonious cooperation. As the 5th millennium before Christ drew to its close, the great and fertile agricultural foundations that had been so patiently laid in the early settlements like Eridu began to bear the most extraordinary fruit. The small, scattered villages of ancient Sumer began to coalesce, to grow, and to transform into something completely and totally unprecedented in all of human history, the first true cities. And at the very forefront of this great urban revolution stood a single, magnificent settlement, a place that was destined to become the world's very first metropolis. This was the great city of Uruk. This was no mere village that had grown large, it represented a fundamentally new and revolutionary form of human organization, a great and complex social machine that would go on to shape the course of all future civilizations. Can you picture it? By the year 3200 BCE, the great city of Uruk had expanded at an absolutely astonishing rate. Massive, defensive walls, which were built of millions of sun-dried mud bricks, now enclosed a vast and densely populated space of nearly 6 square kilometers, a home to approximately 50,000 souls. This was a concentration of humanity that was previously unimaginable. The great city walls stood not only as a powerful and practical defense against any outside threats, but also as a profound and symbolic boundary, a line that separated the ordered, civilized world within from the chaotic and untamed wilderness beyond. And the urban landscape itself revealed a sophisticated and deliberate planning at every turn. At the very heart of the great city rose the magnificent Iana precinct, a vast and sprawling complex of temples that were dedicated to the goddess Inanna, the powerful and beloved goddess of love and of war. And nearby, another great and sacred complex, the Anu Ziggurat, was dedicated to the great sky god, Anu. These two great sacred centers, with their towering temples and their artificial, man-made mountains, commanded the skyline of the entire city. The famous White Temple, for instance, was perched atop a high and artificial platform, a prototype for all the later, more famous ziggurats. Its stark, white, plastered walls would have contrasted dramatically with the deep, blue sky, and it would have been visible from throughout the entire surrounding plain, a powerful and constant reminder of the presence of the gods. And from these two great, sacred centers, a complex and intricate network of narrow, winding residential streets spread outward, creating a series of distinct neighborhoods that would have bustled with a new and vibrant urban energy from dawn until dusk. The great urban revolution that was taking place in Uruk catalyzed a whole cascade of incredible and transformative new innovations. And perhaps the most consequential of all of these was the invention of writing, humanity's very first system for recording and for transmitting complex information outside of the frail and fallible human memory. This incredible and world-changing breakthrough emerged not from any great philosophical or literary ambitions, but from the simple and practical administrative needs of a growing and complex city. The very earliest clay tablets that have been discovered, which date to approximately 3400 BCE, contain simple and beautiful pictographic symbols that represent the common commodities of daily life, such as grain, or sheep, or beer. The great temple administrators, who were now responsible for managing the increasingly complex urban economy, created these proto-cuneiform records to keep track of all the goods that were flowing into and out of their great temple storehouses. Each of these early pictographs originally resembled the object that it represented, a simple, star-like symbol for a sheep, or a simple, vessel shape for beer. This new system of accounting allowed for an unprecedented and remarkable level of precision in the management of the complex urban economy. But the evolution of this new writing system occurred with a remarkable and incredible speed. Within just a few centuries, this simple pictographic system developed into a true and sophisticated form of writing, one that was capable of representing not just things, but also abstract and complex concepts. The scribes began to rotate the signs 90 degrees, and they started to use a new kind of reed stylus to impress small, wedge-shaped marks into the soft clay of their tablets. And it is this characteristic and beautiful appearance that would eventually give the script its modern name, cuneiform, which comes from the Latin word cuneus, meaning wedge. The total number of distinct signs decreased dramatically, from about 2,000 different pictographs to roughly 600 cuneiform characters, a change that made the system much easier to learn while at the same time greatly expanding its expressive and beautiful capabilities. And by the year 3000 BCE, the scribes had developed a new and brilliant way of using these signs to represent not just words, but the very sounds of their spoken language. This was the final and most crucial step toward the creation of a complete and total writing system. This incredible new ability to record and to transmit complex information through a written language would completely and totally transform all of human thought, enabling the creation of complex and sophisticated new administrative systems, of precise and beautiful mathematical calculations, and eventually, of the world's very first great works of literature. With the invention of writing, human knowledge could now begin to accumulate across the generations, no longer limited by the frailties and the imperfections of human memory. It was a true and profound revolution, a revolution that was born in the bustling and vibrant heart of the world's first great city. As the great city of Uruk continued to expand, and as its social and its economic structures grew ever more complex, the need to manage its new and vast resources, to track its extensive trade, and to administer its increasingly intricate society gave rise to one of the most significant and truly revolutionary inventions in all of human history, the invention of writing. This incredible breakthrough, which would forever change the way that human beings could store and could transmit information, emerged not from any great philosophical or literary ambitions, but from the simple and practical administrative needs of the great temple storehouses. Can you imagine the immense logistical challenges of managing a great city's grain stores, or of keeping track of the tribute and the taxes that were owed to the temples? The Sumerian temple administrators created the world's very first writing system, which we now call proto-cuneiform, primarily for this kind of essential record-keeping. Using a simple, pointed stylus, they would draw small, beautiful, pictographic symbols into soft, damp clay tablets, creating a permanent and reliable record of their transactions. Each of these early pictographs originally resembled the object that it represented, a simple, star-like symbol for a sheep, or a simple, vessel shape for beer. This new system of accounting allowed for an unprecedented and remarkable level of precision in the management of the complex and ever-growing urban economy. The evolution of this new writing system from these simple, pictographic origins occurred with a remarkable and incredible speed. Within just a few centuries, this simple system of pictures developed into a true and sophisticated form of writing, one that was capable of representing not just physical things, but also abstract and complex concepts. The scribes began to rotate the signs 90 degrees, and they started to use a new kind of reed stylus, one with a triangular tip, to impress small, wedge-shaped marks into the soft clay of their tablets. And it is this characteristic and beautiful appearance that would eventually give the script its modern name, cuneiform, which comes from the Latin word cuneus, meaning wedge. The total number of distinct signs decreased dramatically, from about 2,000 different pictographs to roughly 600 cuneiform characters, a change that made the system much easier to learn while at the same time greatly expanding its expressive and beautiful capabilities. And by the year 3000 BCE, the scribes had developed a new and brilliant way of using these signs to represent not just words, but the very sounds of their spoken language. This was the final and most crucial step toward the creation of a complete and total writing system. This incredible new ability to record and to transmit complex information through a written language would completely and totally transform all of human thought, enabling the creation of complex and sophisticated new administrative systems, of precise and beautiful mathematical calculations, and eventually, of the world's very first great works of literature. With the invention of writing, human knowledge could now begin to accumulate across the generations, no longer limited by the frailties and the imperfections of human memory. It was a true and profound revolution, a revolution that was born in the bustling and vibrant heart of the world's first great city. The creation and the maintenance of these precious new records gave rise to a new and powerful social class, the scribes. Young men, and occasionally women, would now undergo years upon years of rigorous and difficult training to master the complex and beautiful cuneiform writing system. In their schools, which were known as idubas, or tablet houses, they would learn to shape the clay tablets and to handle the reed styluses with a practiced and precise care. Their long and difficult education, which involved the memorization of hundreds of different signs and the endless copying of administrative and literary texts, set them apart from the general, illiterate population, granting them privileged and powerful positions in the temple and the palace administrations. These scribes were more than just simple record keepers, they were the guardians of their civilization's knowledge, the keepers of its history, and the transmitters of its culture. Their work, this quiet and patient act of pressing wedge-shaped marks into soft clay, was one of the most important and most consequential acts in all of human history. It was an act that would allow the voices, the stories, and the profound wisdom of the ancient Sumerians to echo down through the millennia, a quiet and beautiful and eternal whisper from a world that had been written on a clay tablet. The invention of writing had unleashed a true and profound revolution of the mind, allowing the Sumerians to organize their society and to preserve their knowledge in ways that were previously unimaginable. But the physical world, the world of heavy loads and of hard, unyielding earth, still presented immense and daily challenges. The great cities of Mesopotamia were growing, their population swelling, and the need to transport vast quantities of grain from the fields to the temple storehouses, and to move the great, heavy stones that were needed for their monumental construction projects, was becoming a significant and pressing problem. For centuries, the only way to move heavy objects was through brute, human force, or with the slow and patient power of the domesticated ox. But in the bustling workshops of the great city of Uruk, another, quieter, and more practical revolution was beginning to take shape, an invention that would, quite literally, set the world in motion. This great revolution began not on the roads, but in the quiet and dusty workshops of the potters. For a long time, Sumerian potters had crafted their beautiful ceramic vessels by hand, a slow and painstaking process. But then, a brilliant and anonymous innovator had a new and transformative idea. They created the potter's wheel. Can you picture it? A simple, flat, heavy disc of clay or of wood, spinning smoothly on a central pivot. The potter could now sit before this wheel and, with a gentle and skilled touch, could use the centrifugal force of the spinning disc to shape the wet clay into perfectly symmetrical and elegant forms. This single innovation dramatically increased both the speed and the quality of pottery production, and it was the very first time that humanity had ever harnessed the power of the wheel. But the true and world-changing leap came when another, unknown genius looked at the potter's wheel and saw not just a tool for making pots, but a solution to the great problem of transportation. The first wheels were likely simple, solid discs of wood, cut directly from the trunk of a great tree. They were heavy, they were clumsy, and they were difficult to make. But when they were attached to an axle and placed beneath a simple, wooden platform, they created something completely and totally new, the world's very first cart. Imagine the scene of its first demonstration. A great, heavy load of grain or of bricks, a load that would have required the straining effort of 10 strong men to move, is now placed upon this strange, new contraption. And a single pair of oxen, yoked to the front of the cart, can now pull it with an almost effortless ease, the great, solid wheels groaning and creaking as they turn slowly on the dusty ground. The invention of the wheeled cart was a true and profound revolution. It transformed the economics of agriculture, it made possible the construction of even larger and more magnificent buildings, and it laid the very foundations for the great trade networks that would one day connect the entire ancient world. At the same time as this revolution in transportation was taking place, another, equally transformative, technological leap was occurring in the fiery heart of the blacksmith's forge. For thousands of years, humanity had worked with the materials that nature provided, with stone, with wood, and with bone. But the Sumerian craftsmen, with their insatiable curiosity and their incredible ingenuity, began to experiment with the very earth itself. They discovered that certain, special kinds of rocks, when heated to an incredibly high temperature in a furnace, would release a beautiful and gleaming, reddish-brown liquid. This was molten copper. This process, which we now call smelting, allowed the Sumerians, for the very first time, to extract and to work with a pure metal. But copper, while beautiful, was a relatively soft metal. The tools and the weapons that were made from it were not much stronger than those that were made from sharpened stone. But the Sumerian metalworkers, through a long process of experimentation, made another, even more important discovery. They found that by mixing a small amount of another, rarer metal, tin, with the molten copper, they could create a new and incredibly powerful alloy. This new metal was bronze. Bronze was far harder and far more durable than pure copper, and it could be cast into complex shapes and could be sharpened to a fine and deadly edge. The dawn of the Bronze Age had arrived. The impact of this new metal was immediate and far-reaching. The farmers of Sumer now had new and more powerful tools. Their bronze-tipped plows could cut more deeply into the hard, sun-baked earth, and their bronze sickles could harvest their grain with a much greater efficiency. This led to an even greater agricultural surplus, which in turn fueled the continued growth of their magnificent cities. And in the world of warfare, bronze was a true and total game-changer. The armies of the Sumerian city-states were now equipped with bronze helmets that could deflect the blows of an enemy's mace, with great, bronze shields, and with sharp, deadly, bronze-tipped spears and swords. A soldier who was armed with bronze was almost invincible against a foe who was armed only with stone or with wood. This new and powerful military technology gave a significant and often decisive advantage to the cities that had mastered its production, and it became a powerful and driving force in the escalating conflicts and the political rivalries of the early dynastic period. The two great and practical innovations of the wheel and of bronze had given the Sumerians a new and unprecedented mastery over the physical world. They could now move great weights, they could cultivate their land with a new and greater efficiency, and they could wage war with a new and terrifying lethality. The quiet, peaceful, and cooperative world of the first agricultural villages was now beginning to give way to a new and more dynamic, more competitive, and often more violent age, an age of great and powerful rival city-states, an age of kings and of warriors. The great technological innovations of the wheel and of bronze, and the ever-increasing agricultural wealth that they produced, began to transform the very fabric of Sumerian society. The old and relatively peaceful order, in which the great temples had stood as the undisputed centers of both spiritual and economic life, now began to give way to a new and more turbulent era. The land of Sumer was now a beautiful and vibrant mosaic of powerful and fiercely independent city-states, great urban centers like Ur, Kish, Lagash, and the ever-powerful Uruk, each one vying with its neighbors for control of the most precious and most vital of all resources, the life-giving waters of the Tigris and the Euphrates. This was the dawn of the early dynastic period, an age of escalating conflict, of shifting alliances, and of the rise of a new and powerful kind of leader. In the earliest days of Sumerian civilization, the highest authority in each city had been the the high priest of the city's patron god. But as the competition between the city-states for land and for water grew more and more intense, a new and more secular form of leadership began to emerge. In times of war, the city would appoint a temporary war leader, a great and powerful man who was known as a lugal, a word that literally means big man or great man. This lugal was chosen for his military prowess, for his charisma, and for his ability to lead the city's army to victory. But as the conflicts between the city-states became more frequent and more prolonged, the position of the lugal, which had once been a temporary one, began to become a permanent and hereditary institution. The age of the king had begun. These new Sumerian kings were powerful and ambitious figures. They built great and magnificent palaces for themselves, separate from the old temple complexes, and they surrounded themselves with a new and loyal elite of warriors and of administrators. They were the great war leaders of their cities, and their primary duty was to defend their cities' precious canals and fields from the predations of their rivals. And so, the plains of Mesopotamia, which had for so long been a place of peaceful and cooperative agricultural work, now became a great and bloody chessboard, a stage for the endless and often brutal wars between the rival city-states. One of the most famous and most well-documented of all these early conflicts was the long and bitter war between the neighboring city-states of Lagash and Umma. The story of this epic, century-long struggle is preserved for us on a magnificent and terrifying monument that is known as the Stele of the Vultures. This great, carved stone slab, which was erected by the victorious king of Lagash, Eannatum, is a powerful and chilling piece of royal propaganda. It depicts, in a series of beautiful and brutal scenes, the great victory of Lagash over its hated rival. On one side, we see the great king Eannatum, his war chariot pulled by 4 powerful onagers, leading his tightly packed and disciplined phalanx of bronze-helmeted soldiers into battle. And on the other, we see the grim and terrible aftermath of the victory. Great, circling vultures are shown picking at the bodies of the slain enemy soldiers, their severed heads piled up in a great and gruesome mound. And the great god of Lagash himself, Ningirsu, is depicted holding a great net that is filled with the captured and struggling soldiers of Umma. The Stele of the Vultures is a powerful and sobering reminder of the new and brutal reality of Sumerian life, an age in which the fate of a city and its people was decided not by the prayers of the priests, but by the sharp, bronze spear of the warrior. But these new kings were more than just simple war leaders. They were also the great builders and the patrons of their cities. They commissioned the construction of magnificent new temples, of great and imposing city walls, and of vast and complex new irrigation projects. They presented themselves not as rivals to the old priestly authority, but as the chosen and beloved servants of their city's patron god. The king was the great and powerful shepherd of his people, the one who was responsible for maintaining the divine order and for ensuring the prosperity and the well-being of his city. And so, A new and complex and often tense relationship began to develop between the two great centers of power in the Sumerian city, the palace and the temple, the king and the priest. This delicate and ever-shifting balance between the secular and the sacred, between the power of the sword and the power of the word, would become one of the most enduring and most important themes in all of Mesopotamian history. The quiet and ordered world of the first cities had now given way to a new and more dynamic and dangerous age, an age of heroes, of warriors, and of kings, an age whose great and often tragic stories would be immortalized in the world's first great works of epic literature. In the quiet and sun-drenched landscape of southern Mesopotamia, in the heart of what was once the magnificent and powerful city-state of Uruk, a British archaeologist named Sir Leonard Woolley began a series of excavations in the 1920s that would completely and forever reshape our understanding of the ancient Sumerian world. For years, he and his team worked tirelessly under the hot desert sun, carefully and patiently peeling back the layers of sand and of time. And in the year 1927, they unearthed something truly and utterly extraordinary, a discovery that would send shockwaves throughout the entire world. They had found the royal cemetery of Uruk, a vast and ancient necropolis that dated all the way back to the early dynastic period, to the very age of the great warrior kings. The 16 royal tombs that they would eventually uncover were more than just simple graves. They were treasure houses of almost unimaginable wealth and of breathtaking artistic beauty, and they held within them a deep, dark, and profound secret about the nature of Sumerian kingship and their beliefs about the afterlife. Let us now journey together, into the cool, dark, and silent depths of one of these magnificent royal tombs. Imagine descending a long and sloping ramp, leaving the bright and noisy world of the living behind, and entering a quiet and sacred space, a house of eternity that has been sealed for over 4,500 years. The air is still and cool, and it carries the faint, earthy scent of ancient dust and of long-forgotten time. As our eyes adjust to the dim light, a scene of incredible and almost overwhelming splendor begins to emerge from the darkness. The tomb is filled with a breathtaking array of beautiful and precious objects, all carefully and lovingly placed there to accompany the great king or queen on their final journey into the afterlife. There are magnificent and elegant chariots, their wooden frames adorned with intricate mosaics of shell and of red limestone. There are beautiful and delicate musical instruments, like the famous lyres of Uruk, their sound boxes decorated with the golden heads of bearded bulls, their strings, now long decayed, once played the sad and beautiful music of the royal court. And there are chests filled with intricate and beautiful board games, like the royal game of Uruk, a testament to the quiet and leisurely pursuits of the Sumerian elite. And everywhere, there is the soft and beautiful gleam of gold. The treasures that were found in the royal tombs of Uruk are some of the most magnificent and most beautiful works of art ever created by the hand of man. There is the magnificent golden helmet of a king named Mesopotamia, a helmet that was hammered from a single, solid sheet of gold and was exquisitely crafted in the shape of the king's own elaborate hairstyle. And there is the incredible and beautiful headdress of a great queen named Puabi. Imagine it. A complex and magnificent creation of golden leaves, of golden rings, and of beautiful, golden flowers, all intertwined with intricate strings of lapis lazuli and carnelian beads, a true and breathtaking masterpiece of the goldsmith's art that would have framed her face in a halo of divine and golden light. These incredible and beautiful treasures were more than just simple decorations. They were powerful and potent symbols of the immense wealth, the divine status, and the absolute power of the rulers of Uruk. But amidst all this breathtaking beauty and this incredible wealth, Woolley and his team discovered something else, something far more mysterious and far more chilling. They discovered that the great royal tombs were not occupied by the king or the queen alone. They were great death pits, filled with the bodies of dozens, and in some cases, up to 74, other individuals. Who were these people? They were the royal retainers, the musicians, the soldiers, and the handmaidens of the court, and they had all, it seemed, accompanied their royal master into death. The scene that was unearthed was a quiet and orderly one. The soldiers were found lying in neat rows, their bronze helmets still on their heads, their spears still clutched in their hands. The female attendants, adorned in their beautiful jewelry of gold and of lapis lazuli, were found lying peacefully, as if they had simply fallen asleep. And near each body was a small, clay cup. What did this strange and somber scene mean? It seems that when a great king or queen of Ur died, their most loyal and most trusted servants would accompany them into the afterlife. This was not a scene of violent or brutal sacrifice. It seems instead to have been a quiet, solemn, and highly ritualized ceremony. The royal retainers would have gathered together in the great death pit, they would have drunk a powerful sleeping potion from their small clay cups, and they would have then laid down to sleep, their eternal service to their beloved ruler continuing, uninterrupted, into the great and mysterious world of the afterlife. This incredible and profound act of communal sacrifice is a powerful and sobering testament to the immense and almost absolute power of the Sumerian kings, and to the deep and unshakable belief that the social order of this world would be perfectly and eternally replicated in the next. The royal cemetery of Ur, with its magnificent treasures and its deep and quiet mystery, provides us with an invaluable and unprecedented window into the world of the ancient Sumerians. It shows us a civilization that was capable of creating works of breathtaking beauty and of incredible artistic and technical skill. But it also shows us a society that was deeply and profoundly preoccupied with the great and eternal mysteries of life, of death, and of the afterlife. It was a world where the power of the king was absolute, both in this life and in the next, a world where the bonds of loyalty and of service were so profound that they could transcend the very boundary of death itself. The quiet and beautiful, and often terrible, secrets of the royal tombs of Ur are a powerful and enduring reminder of the incredible complexity and the profound and often alien nature of the world's very first great civilization. The ancient Sumerians looked out upon their world, the flat, fertile land that was nestled between the two great rivers, and they saw it not as a world that was governed by blind, natural forces, but as a world that was alive with the presence of the divine. For them, every aspect of their existence, from the life-giving flood of the rivers to the gentle and beautiful light of the moon, from the rustling of the reeds in the marshes to the crafting of the very first brick, was the direct and tangible manifestation of a powerful and unseen divine being. Theirs was a world that was teeming with gods, a great and complex pantheon of hundreds, and perhaps even thousands, of deities, each one with their own unique personality, their own sacred duties, and their own often unpredictable and very human-like desires. At the very head of this great and sprawling divine family stood a triad of powerful and remote creator gods. There was the great god of the heavens, a distant and majestic figure who embodied the vast and silent expanse of the sky above. There was Enlil, the powerful and often tempestuous god of the wind and of the storm, a deity whose breath could bring both the gentle, cooling breezes of summer and the destructive, raging gales of winter. And there was Enki, the wise and cunning god of the freshwater deep, the master of magic and of creation, the great and benevolent friend of humanity who, as we have seen, was the beloved patron god of the ancient city of Eridu. These three great gods were the primary forces of the cosmos, the great architects of the universe. But it was the next generation of gods, the more active and more accessible deities, who were the true focus of the Sumerians' daily worship and their rich and beautiful mythology. And among these, none was more beloved or more feared than the great goddess, Inanna. Inanna was a goddess of profound and beautiful contradictions. She was the beautiful and sensual goddess of love and of fertility, but she was also the fierce and terrible goddess of war. She was a deity of immense power and of boundless ambition, and her stories are filled with her clever and often ruthless attempts to expand her own divine domains. In one famous myth, she travels to the great city of Eridu to visit her wise father, Enki. And there, in his great underwater palace, she challenges him to a great drinking contest. And as the wise old god becomes more and more intoxicated, Inanna cleverly and cunningly tricks him into giving her over 100 of the sacred me, the divine decrees that governed all the arts and the institutions of civilization. And with these new and powerful gifts, which included the arts of kingship, of justice, and of writing, she returns in triumph to her own city of Uruk, greatly increasing its power and its prestige. The Sumerians believed that humanity had been created by the gods for a single and simple purpose: to serve them. Humans were the servants of the gods, their laborers, their farmers, their builders. It was the sacred duty of humanity to provide the gods with food, with drink, and with beautiful temples, and in return, the gods would ensure the continued order and prosperity of the world. But this relationship was not always a peaceful one. The gods were often capricious and unpredictable, and their great and cosmic struggles could have devastating consequences for the mortal world below. The greatest and most famous of all the Sumerian myths, a story that would be told and retold for thousands of years and would eventually find its way into the great flood stories of the Bible and of other world mythologies, was the story of the Great Deluge. In this epic tale, the great god Enlil, who had grown angry and frustrated with the constant noise and the clamor of humanity, decides to wipe them all out with a great and terrible flood. But the wise and benevolent god, Enki, who had a deep and abiding love for his human creations, secretly warns a single, righteous man, a man named Ziusudra. Enki instructs Ziusudra to build a great and massive boat, and to bring onto it his family and a pair of every living creature. And so, when the great flood comes, when the rains fall for 6 days and for 6 nights, and the entire world is submerged beneath the dark and churning waters, Ziusudra and his precious cargo are the only survivors. And when the waters finally recede, it is from this single, small boat that all of life is reborn, a new and beautiful world that is born from the great and terrible destruction of the old one. This rich and beautiful tapestry of myths and of legends provided the Sumerians with a powerful and coherent way of understanding their world. It explained the great and often mysterious forces of nature, it justified the social and the political order of their cities, and it gave a deep and profound meaning to their lives. Their gods were not distant and abstract beings, they were real and powerful and ever-present forces, beings who could be loved, who could be feared, and who could be appeased through the careful and correct performance of the sacred rituals. This deep and profound sense of a world that was alive with the divine, a world that was governed by a great and complex cosmic order, was the very foundation of the Sumerian worldview. And it was from this rich and fertile soil of myth and of religious belief that the world's very first great hero, and the world's very first great work of epic literature, would now begin to emerge. From the rich and ancient soil of Mesopotamian myth, there arises a figure who is both a king and a legend, a hero whose epic story is the very first great masterpiece of world literature. This is the tale of Gilgamesh, the mighty and powerful king of the great city of Uruk. His story, which was first written down on a series of 12 clay tablets over 4,000 years ago, is more than just an adventure, it is a profound and timeless exploration of the very nature of what it means to be human. It is a story about friendship, about loss, about the terrible and beautiful finality of death, and about the deep and eternal human quest for a meaning that can transcend our own mortality. The story begins in the great, walled city of Uruk, where Gilgamesh rules as a powerful and often tyrannical king. He is a figure of immense and superhuman strength, a man who is said to be 2/3 god and 1/3 mortal. But his great power has made him arrogant and cruel. He oppresses his people, and his boundless energy finds no worthy outlet. And so, the people of Uruk cry out to the great gods for help. And the gods, in their wisdom, decide to create a companion for Gilgamesh, a man who can match his great strength and who can temper his wild and restless spirit. And so, they create Enkidu. Enkidu is a wild man, a creature of nature. He is raised in the wilderness, among the animals, and his body is covered in a thick, matted hair. He is innocent of all the ways of civilization. But when Gilgamesh hears of this wild man, he sends a beautiful temple prostitute, Shamhat, to tame him. And through her gentle and patient guidance, Enkidu is slowly and beautifully initiated into the world of humanity. He learns to eat cooked food, to drink wine, and to wear clothes. And when he finally travels to the great city of Uruk, he confronts Gilgamesh. The two great and powerful men wrestle in the city square, their strength perfectly and equally matched. And from this great and epic struggle, a deep and profound friendship is born. They become like brothers, two sides of the same soul, and their great love for one another will become the very heart of the entire epic. Now that Gilgamesh has found a true and equal companion, he seeks to make a great and lasting name for himself. And so, the two heroes decide to embark on a great and dangerous adventure. They travel to the great and sacred cedar forest, a place that is guarded by a terrible and monstrous giant named Humbaba. And after a great and epic battle, they manage to slay the great monster and to cut down the sacred cedar trees, an act of great and heroic hubris that will have terrible and unforeseen consequences. Their fame now spreads throughout the entire land. But their great victory has angered the gods. And the beautiful and powerful goddess, Inanna, who is impressed by Gilgamesh's great beauty and strength, comes to him and asks him to be her husband. But Gilgamesh, in his arrogance, cruelly and foolishly rejects her. And the scorned goddess, in her terrible fury, unleashes the great and terrible bull of heaven to destroy the city of Uruk. But once again, the two great heroes, Gilgamesh and Enkidu, stand together, and they manage to slay the great celestial beast. But their defiance of the gods cannot go unpunished. The great gods meet in council, and they decide that one of the two heroes must die. And so, they strike Enkidu down with a terrible and wasting illness. Gilgamesh is heartbroken. He sits by his friend's bedside, watching helplessly as the great and powerful wild man slowly fades away. And when Enkidu finally dies, Gilgamesh's grief is absolute and all-consuming. But his grief is also mixed with a new and terrible emotion, fear. For the very first time in his arrogant and powerful life, Gilgamesh is confronted with the stark and terrible reality of his own mortality. He looks at the still and silent body of his beloved friend, and he sees his own future. And he is terrified. And so, driven by this new and terrible fear of death, Gilgamesh embarks on a new and even greater quest, a quest not for fame or for glory, but for the very secret of eternal life. He decides to seek out the one mortal man who has ever escaped death, the great hero of the flood, Utnapishtim, who lives in a distant and mythical land at the very ends of the earth. His journey is a long and perilous one. He travels through the great and dark mountains at the edge of the world, he battles strange and monstrous scorpion men, and he crosses the great and deadly waters of death with the help of a mysterious ferryman. And finally, after many long and arduous trials, he arrives at the distant and beautiful shore where the wise and ancient Utnapishtim lives. Gilgamesh tells the old man his story, and he begs him for the secret of eternal life. But Utnapishtim tells him that immortality is a gift of the gods, a gift that cannot be earned by mortals. He tells Gilgamesh the great and ancient story of the flood, and he reveals that his own immortality was a unique and unrepeatable reward for having saved all of life from the great destruction. But he does offer Gilgamesh a single, small chance. He tells him of a magical and thorny plant that grows at the very bottom of the sea, a plant that can restore a person's youth. And so, Gilgamesh ties great stones to his feet, and he dives deep into the dark and silent waters. And he finds the plant. He returns to the surface, his heart filled with a new and triumphant hope. He decides not to eat the plant himself, but to take it back to his great city of Uruk, to share its gift with the old men of his city. But on his long journey home, as he stops to bathe in a cool, clear pool of water, a serpent slithers out from the reeds, and it steals the magical plant. And as the serpent eats the plant, it sheds its old and wrinkled skin, and it slithers away, young and beautiful and reborn. And in that quiet and terrible moment, Gilgamesh finally and truly understands. He sits down and he weeps, his great and heroic quest having ended in failure. He has lost his one and only chance at eternal life. And it is in this moment of profound and total despair that he finally learns the great and beautiful and tragic lesson of his long and epic journey. He understands that the true and only immortality that a mortal can ever hope to achieve is not an immortality of the body, but an immortality of the name. It is the legacy that we leave behind, the great and beautiful things that we create, the stories that will be told about us long after we are gone. And so, he returns to his great city of Uruk, no longer as a tyrant, but as a wise and just king. He looks at the great and magnificent walls that he has built, the walls that will protect his people for generations to come, and he finally finds a sense of peace. The Epic of Gilgamesh is a profound and beautiful story, a story that speaks to us across the millennia, a timeless and powerful reminder that while our own lives may be fleeting, the great and beautiful works of humanity, the great works of friendship, of love, and of creation, can and will endure forever. Amidst the constant and beautiful kaleidoscope of the competing Sumerian city-states, a new and transformative figure was about to emerge, a man who would completely and forever reshape the political geography of the entire ancient world. This was Sargon of Akkad, a charismatic and brilliant leader who would rise from a background of almost total obscurity to forge history's very first true empire. His dramatic and legendary story would mark the definitive end of the Sumerian city-state era and would usher in a new age of centralized, imperial power. According to the legends that were written centuries after his death, Sargon's origins were shrouded in a deep and profound mystery. He was said to have been a child of humble and unknown birth, who was placed in a simple reed basket by his mother, a high priestess, and was then set adrift on the great Euphrates River, a tale that would echo down through the millennia in the similar and famous stories of other great, abandoned infants who were destined for greatness. The legend tells us that he was found and was then raised by a royal gardener, and that he eventually rose through the ranks of the court to become the cupbearer to the king of the powerful city of Kish. And it was from this strategic and trusted position that the ambitious young man, who would call himself Sargon, a name that means, the legitimate king, orchestrated a great and successful coup against his royal master. Whether this beautiful and legendary story of his birth is true or not, the historical reality of his achievements is undeniable. Having secured control of the great city of Kish, Sargon turned his formidable and revolutionary military talents against all the other Sumerian city-states. One by one, the great and ancient urban centers fell to his disciplined and powerful forces. Even the mighty city of Uruk, with its massive and legendary defensive walls, could not withstand his innovative and brutal new siege tactics. His military campaigns, which were commemorated in both later literature and in his own contemporary inscriptions, were conducted on an unprecedented and massive scale and with a remarkable level of organization. His forces, it was said, numbered over 5,000 men, a great, standing, professional army, rather than the seasonal and often unreliable militias of the other city-states. This military innovation gave him a decisive and overwhelming advantage over his rivals. His great and final victory came with the defeat and the capture of the powerful king of Uruk, Lugalzagesi, who had himself previously unified all of the southern Mesopotamian city-states under his own rule. Sargon, in a powerful and symbolic statement of his absolute victory, humiliated his defeated rival by parading him in a neck-stalk to the great gate of the temple of the god Enlil in the sacred city of Nippur. But Sargon's ambitions extended far beyond the traditional territory of Sumer. Within a single generation, his conquests had created a vast new empire that stretched all the way from the Persian Gulf in the south to the shores of the Mediterranean Sea in the west. His armies marched victorious through the great Tigris and Euphrates Valley, across the Syrian plateau, and into the mountains of Anatolia. To govern this vast and diverse new territory, this new multi-ethnic and multilingual empire, Sargon and his successors had to create a series of new and innovative administrative solutions. They installed their own loyal followers as governors in the conquered territories, and they required the sons of the local elites to be educated at their own royal court in their new capital city of Akkad. This system created a powerful and new series of administrative linkages that bound the distant and diverse regions of their empire to a single, central authority. This new Akkadian empire fostered an unprecedented level of cultural exchange between the previously isolated regions of the ancient world. Artistic motifs, technological innovations, and religious concepts now began to circulate across all the old, traditional boundaries. The cosmopolitan and vibrant atmosphere of the great imperial cities created a dynamic new environment where diverse and beautiful traditions could interact and could influence one another, creating new and beautiful hybrid forms of art and of thought. And under the new and powerful protection of the Akkadian Empire, the great trade networks of the ancient world expanded dramatically. Merchants could now travel with a new and unprecedented level of safety and of security, and exotic new materials, like the beautiful, blue lapis lazuli from the distant mountains of Afghanistan and the strong, fragrant cedar wood from Lebanon, now flowed into the imperial heartland, fueling new and magnificent artistic and architectural achievements. The great experiment of empire had begun, a new and powerful force that would go on to shape the course of all of human history. The great Akkadian Empire, which had for a time united the entire Mesopotamian world under a single, powerful authority, had now crumbled into dust. It had been brought low by a combination of internal rebellion and a catastrophic and long-lasting drought. And into this power vacuum came a new and disruptive force, the Gutians, a fierce and nomadic people from the eastern mountains. For nearly a century, they held sway over the fertile plains of Sumer, a period that later Sumerian scribes would remember as a dark and chaotic age. The great and interconnected network of trade and of administration that had been so carefully built by the Akkadian kings now fell into disrepair. The great cities, now isolated and vulnerable, began to shrink, and the light of civilization, which had burned so brightly, seemed to be on the very verge of being extinguished. But even in this time of darkness and of fragmentation, the quiet and resilient spirit of the Sumerian people endured. In the great southern cities, like Lagash and Uruk, a series of powerful and independent native dynasties began to reassert their authority, pushing back against the Gutian invaders. And from these centers of resistance, a great movement of cultural and political revival began to take shape. The final and most glorious chapter in the long story of Sumerian civilization was about to begin. The great liberation came from the ancient and sacred city of Uruk, where a powerful king named Utuhengal finally managed to rally the other Sumerian cities and to decisively defeat the Gutian forces, driving them from the land of Sumer forever. But his triumph was to be short-lived. And power soon passed to his former governor of the great city of Ur, an ambitious and brilliant leader named Ur-Nammu. It was Ur-Nammu who would establish the third dynasty of Ur, a new and powerful dynasty that would oversee a remarkable and beautiful renaissance of Sumerian culture, a last, brilliant flowering of their civilization before its final, quiet sunset. Ur-Nammu was a man of immense vision and of great and practical skill. He embarked on a series of ambitious military campaigns, systematically reunifying all of the old Sumerian territories under his own, centralized authority. But he presented himself not as a foreign conqueror, but as a great and pious restorer of the ancient and sacred Sumerian traditions. And to solidify his new and unified kingdom, he commissioned a series of magnificent and ambitious construction projects. And no monument better symbolized this new age of restoration and of Sumerian pride than the great ziggurat of Ur. This massive, step temple tower, which was dedicated to the moon god Nana, the patron deity of the city, was one of the most magnificent and most impressive architectural achievements of the entire ancient world. Built of millions of mud bricks and with an outer skin of beautiful, kiln-fired bricks that were set in bitumen, its great and monumental form rose high above the surrounding plain, a powerful and visible statement of the renewed power, of the immense wealth, and of the deep and abiding religious legitimacy of the new dynasty. But Ur-Nammu's most significant and most enduring achievement lay not in the realm of architecture, but in the realm of law. It was Ur-Nammu who gave to the world the very first, complete, and surviving written law code in all of human history, a great and remarkable legal document that predates the more famous Code of Hammurabi by over 3 centuries. What did this great law code say? The surviving fragments address a wide and fascinating range of issues, from family law and commercial regulations to the punishment for various crimes. But unlike the later Babylonian law, which often prescribed brutal, physical punishments, Ur-Nammu's code, for the most part, imposed monetary fines and compensation as the penalty for various offenses. This remarkable preference for restitution over retribution suggests a surprisingly sophisticated and humane understanding of the true social function of law. This great and systematic approach to justice represented a significant and profound advance in all of governmental theory and of practice, balancing the power of the central authority with a clear and predictable set of legal procedures. The great Sumerian Renaissance reached its absolute zenith during the long and incredibly successful, 48-year reign of Ur-Nammu's son, Shulgi. Shulgi was a man who combined his father's military prowess with an administrative genius that was truly unparalleled in the ancient world. He created a new and incredibly sophisticated bureaucratic system that would become the very model of organizational efficiency. The entire empire was divided into a series of administrative provinces, each one governed by an official who was directly and personally responsible to the royal court in Ur. He standardized all the record-keeping practices, which ensured a consistent and an efficient system of taxation and of resource allocation throughout his entire realm. And he established a great and powerful new system of royal messengers who traveled along the well-maintained roads of the empire, connecting all the major cities. But his most impressive and most sophisticated innovation was the Bala tax system. This was a rotational obligation that required each province to support the central government for a specified period of time each year, providing agricultural goods, manufactured products, and labor service, all according to a series of carefully and mathematically calculated quotas. This incredible and complex system ensured that the central institutions of the empire were continuously and equitably supported, and its mathematical precision and its organizational complexity exceeded anything that had ever been seen before in human governance. Alongside all of these practical and administrative innovations, King Shulgi also fostered a great and beautiful renaissance of literature and of scholarship. He himself claimed to be a great scholar, a man who was literate in both the ancient and sacred language of Sumerian and the more common, everyday language of Akkadian. And under his royal patronage, the great scribal schools of his kingdom collected and preserved all the older literary texts of Sumer, while at the same time creating beautiful and powerful new compositions. It was during his long and peaceful reign that the great epic of Gilgamesh was likely compiled into its most complete and most beautiful form. This was the final, brilliant, and beautiful song of Sumerian civilization, a last great flowering of their culture, their art, and their profound and ancient wisdom. But this golden age, too, was not destined to last forever. New and powerful external threats were once again beginning to gather on the borders of their empire, and the great and ancient civilization of the Sumerians was about to sing its final, quiet, and beautiful swan song. The great and magnificent renaissance of the third dynasty of Uruk, that final, brilliant flowering of Sumerian culture, was not destined to last forever. The elaborate and highly centralized bureaucratic system that King Shulgi had so brilliantly perfected, while incredibly efficient, also contained the seeds of its own destruction. The immense tax burdens and the constant demands for labor that were placed upon the rural populations left them vulnerable and weary. And the agricultural lands of southern Mesopotamia, after thousands of years of intensive irrigation, were becoming increasingly saline, the soil itself slowly being poisoned by the very waters that had once given it life. These deep, internal stresses, combined with renewed and powerful external pressures from the Elamites in the east and the nomadic Amorites in the west, began to stretch the military and the economic resources of the empire beyond their breaking point. And so, around the year 2004 BCE, the final blow came. The great city of Uruk, the magnificent capital of the Sumerian world, was sacked and destroyed by the invading Elamite forces. The great temples were desecrated, the magnificent palaces were plundered, and the last Sumerian king was led away in chains. A great and profound silence fell over the plains of Sumer. The long and incredible, 3,000-year-old story of the Sumerian people as a distinct political and ethnic entity had finally come to its end. A great and beautiful light, the very first light of human civilization, seemed to have been extinguished forever. But a fire, even after it has burned down, leaves behind its warm and glowing embers. And the legacy of the Sumerians, the incredible and profound contributions they made to the great story of human civilization, would not be so easily erased. Their political power may have vanished, but their ideas, their innovations, and their very way of seeing the world, were a powerful and enduring inheritance, a great and beautiful gift that they would pass on to all the subsequent civilizations that would rise in the ancient world and beyond. Imagine a young Babylonian scribe, centuries after the fall of Uruk, sitting in a quiet and dusty scribal school in the great city of Babylon. He is learning to write, not in his own native Akkadian language, but in the ancient and sacred tongue of Sumerian. He is meticulously copying the old Sumerian myths, the great hymns to the gods, and the epic and beautiful story of the hero Gilgamesh. The Sumerian language was no longer spoken in the streets, but it lived on in the schools and in the temples, much like Latin would in medieval Europe, as the sacred language of learning, of religion, and of high culture. And the great and flexible cuneiform writing system that the Sumerians had invented was adopted and adapted by all the subsequent peoples who came to rule Mesopotamia, the Akkadians, the Babylonians, the Assyrians, and the Persians, and it would remain in use for over 3,000 years, a powerful and enduring testament to the genius of its creators. And what of their laws? The Great Code of Hammurabi, one of the most famous and most influential legal documents in all of history, was not an entirely new creation. It was built directly upon the foundations that had been laid by the Sumerians. The very idea of a written law, a law that was publicly displayed and systematically organized, was a Sumerian invention. And the legal principles that were first established in the Code of Uruk, such as the distinction between different kinds of offenses and the preference for monetary compensation over simple retribution, would go on to shape the course of legal thinking for millennia. Their practical and scientific innovations proved to be just as enduring. The wheel, that most fundamental of all human inventions, would go on to revolutionize transportation and warfare all across the entire globe. And their remarkable mathematical concepts, particularly their sexagesimal, or base, 60, system, have, in a strange and beautiful way, survived to this very day. The next time you look at a clock and you see an hour that is divided into 60 minutes, and a minute that is divided into 60 seconds, you are seeing a quiet and beautiful echo of the ancient Sumerians. And the next time you look at a circle and you see that it is divided into 360 degrees, you are seeing the legacy of the Sumerian astronomers, the very first people to systematically map the heavens and to chart the slow and beautiful and predictable dance of the stars. And finally, their great and powerful stories, the world's very first literature, would resonate through the ages. Their creation myths, their stories of the gods, and particularly their great and ancient tale of a world-destroying flood, would be told and retold, adapted and transformed by countless other cultures, their themes and their archetypes becoming a fundamental and enduring part of our shared human, cultural DNA. And so, as we reflect on this remarkable and pioneering civilization, we are reminded that the end of a story is not always an ending. The Sumerians, as a people, may have faded into the mists of history, their great cities now just quiet and dusty mounds in the Iraqi desert. But the great and beautiful fire that they first lit, the fire of civilization itself, was never truly extinguished. Its warm and glowing embers were carefully carried forward by other hands, by other cultures, and its light, the light of writing, of law, of the city, and of the dream of a more ordered and a more meaningful world, has continued to illuminate the long and epic journey of humanity, a beautiful and eternal spark that still burns brightly in our own world to this very day. And with that final thought, our long and quiet journey into the world of the very first civilization comes to its end. From the first, simple canals that were dug in the fertile earth to the great and epic quest of the hero Gilgamesh, it has been a story of incredible innovation, of profound wisdom, and of enduring resilience. Now, let the echoes of these ancient cities and their remarkable people fade into the quiet of the night. It is time for history to rest, and it is time for you to rest as well. Good night, and have wise and peaceful dreams.